Welcome everyone to another episode of Sync Riffs. My name is Charles from Blue Buddha, an LA-based sync agency firm, and we have a very special guest in the studio, film, television composer, and also conductor here in Los Angeles, Jermaine Stegall. Good morning, Jermaine.
Hey, good morning. How's it going?
It's going really good. So happy to have you for an extended chat. We had you in on our Black Music Month celebration panel last week, and thought it'd be neat to have you in the studio here and take a deeper dive, if you will, and chat about some of your work and your process as a composer. You've worked on films like Praise This, Coming to America, Proximity, and correct, so I get it right, our Star Wars stories.
Yeah. Yep, our Star Wars stories. Some of my faves.
Yes, no, we can start with that. So 2016, correct? If you walk us through, you had applied.
Well, funny enough, so 2016, I mean, you're talking about how I ended up in doing it.
Yes.
This is a series of dots connecting, but in 2015, I actually did a short film called Dome. And I was working with a director, Brandon Fayette, who was the head of visual effects at Bad Robot, and his producing partner was Mickey Capoferri, who was the head of online content at Lucasfilm. And in 2016, you mentioned 2016, I actually got the opportunity to do what's called the Music and Sound Design Lab through the Sundance family at Skywalker Ranch. So it was just kind of a funny connection where I'd done a short film for someone that actually worked at Lucasfilm and I'd never been there. And when I did the Sundance Composer Lab, I ended up running into someone that in the gift shop that did later invite me to speak at Lucasfilm, their animation and industrial light and magic ILM department, about being a composer, doing almost like a TED talk.
Okay.
And my name kept circulating, but Mickey and I had worked together before on the short film, so we were just catching up. I think it was 2018 is when they had what was season 1. I think it was 5 episodes or something like that. And about the fact that he was going to be shooting something that was like a documentary about families and people whose lives have been affected by Star Wars. And at that time, I think, like I said, I think it was either 5 or 8 episodes, and they were going to shoot them. And we were just talking, and they had done. I think there was a series called Science in Star Wars, as well as the Star Wars show, but this was going to be a little bit, I guess, different. And I just brainstormed the idea of having an original score for each document instead of just having music underscore, just in the background. Let's actually score the dialogue. And when they're talking about, if anyone watches the series, as they're talking about different iterations of Star Wars or different episodes or what makes them tick or when they grew up or which episode was their first, we're actually scoring the movie in the style of that specific Star Wars moment, so to speak. You know what I mean? So it ties itself together in a nice way, and we weren't able to use any John Williams themes, but we wanted to have the sound and the texture and the DNA of at least the first, because I think episode 8 and 9 weren't out yet, so at least 7 movies that we knew of. And as Rogue One came out, like that became a part of the harmonic language. But that's really the style of the score, because like I said, we decided not to use like I said, it was more of a legal thing where we weren't able to use John Williams' main thing. But if you listen to it, it all sounds familiar, and you're not supposed to be able to figure out why. But it's kind of a fun thing to just kind of jump around. When they're talking about Ewoks, it kind of has that little bit of that sound. They talk about going into different cantina-like scenarios. We have
Yeah,
that kind of sound. So yeah.
that's very cool. Now, correct, Jermaine, you also, when you worked on that, you had conducted some live, there was live orchestration.
Well, actually, funny enough, while I was
Mhm,
working on that, season 2, um, in 2020, that was during our pandemic, which was very funny. So
mhm.
before that, I had gone back actually to Skywalker Ranch to record. This is somewhat related, but unrelated. A couple of other scores that were indie. One uh, called Canvas, that the director was from Pixar, which is close to Skywalker Ranch, and
Okay.
then we'd also recorded actually Proximity uh, at Skywalker Ranch as well. But we didn't record anything from Star Wars Stories there. We ended up
Nice.
just uh, producing it in such a way that it felt as if we did. But tying all this together was kind of a funny time because while they were shooting Coming to America, I was flying back and forth to set, and one of the flights I had to fly, basically up to Skywalker Ranch. I think we did Canvas during that time
Mm-hmm.
while Star Wars Stories was going on and Coming to America was being shot. So it was just one of those funny things.
Yeah,
But and
wow.
again, like with the pandemic, and I know I'm kind of all over the place.
Sure.
Fast forward into 2020,
Mhm.
we are now not able to like meet or anything in person. So we're actually supposed to do the final mix of Canvas at Skywalker, and all of our music meetings for every project, everything was virtual at that point. So it was
Mhm.
one of
Mhm.
those funny things where um, for Star Wars Stories specifically, they were halfway through shooting season 2, and like I said, I think it was 12 episodes, 10 episodes. I can't remember what it was, but
Mhm.
they
Mhm.
figured out a way to send a camera kit to each interviewee, and they would
Okay.
have a Zoom call with the person and explain how to unfold the gear, the lights, set up
Nice.
the wires, and all that stuff so that they can still do these virtual interviews during COVID to
Wow.
finish producing them. So,
Right.
yeah, so in 2020, I think that fall is when I was finishing season 2 of Our Star Wars. The people are basically having to film themselves doing this stuff,
Right.
and then they have another Zoom call on how to pack all the gear up and send it back to Lucasfilm.
I
Um,
see.
so yeah, the things we go through to create art, right? You know,
100%. No, and
yeah.
Jermaine, I think that's a great segue. Something that
Mhm.
you had talked about in another podcast is, life of a working artist when, it's fascinating to me to hear inspiration can come at any moment. So
Yeah.
you're recording ideas on your cell phone.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean that. Yeah, I always heard about these ideas, recording and singing into a tape recorder, and wondered if it would ever work. You know,
Uh-huh.
and it's not about like not knowing how to compose music with pencil and paper or with a digital workstation or whatever. It was about, can I tap into something that someone else said that they tapped into in a more primitive way?
Hmm.
Which is just like having the music come directly out of your body. You know, your
Yeah.
instincts, your first instincts, without thinking about any sort of you know um, technical thing to help you get that you know that that melody or that idea out. And so a lot of times I have started, if I'm thinking a lot about a melody when I'm working on themes or melodies, like just being like, I shouldn't be afraid to sing these into a phone. It's like I have a
Yeah.
bunch of things they're all untitled. I know what they are if I listen to them because I know what I was thinking. Like
Mhm.
my brain tells me what I was thinking when I hear myself singing a certain thing. So
Mm.
it's also a way of like if anyone ever finds my phone, they won't know which one is which, but I'll know. That's like the passcode.
Right.
Um, but yeah, I don't label them; they're just all untitled.
Wow.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's almost like the artist's sketchbook, if you will. Like you said, if you're a
it
writer
is.
or an artist, and just
It is. I mean, you
having
got to
those
have some
ideas.
way. Yeah, you got to
Mhm.
have some way of doing something where you're very free.
Mhm.
Because
Mhm.
I play a bit of piano. Quite a bit. I feel very comfortable kind of improvising. I call it composer chops. I don't definitely have a list of about 50 keyboard piano players that I would like to work with. So I don't consider myself someone that I would record and be like, oh, that's the featured pianist, Jermaine Stegall. No, like I want to work with people that, they specialize in that. I did not go to school for piano playing, but I can get around quite comfortably to get my ideas out. But I think, singing it's just, they're all tools, even your
Yes.
digital audio workstation is a tool. So just use them all the best of your abilities and try to be oneself, really. I think I expressed on our last meeting that violin was my first instrument, but saxophone was my main instrument in college. And in my early stages of composing, I was always trying to figure out how to use saxophone to either A, get the ideas out, or B, can I highlight the saxophone in some way that lets people know who wrote this, have that be a part of my sound. And I don't think it quite ever took off to this is officially part of my sound, but singing has just been an extension of that. And it probably makes sense because saxophone it's almost like you're singing in a way. Like you can really it's a monophonic instrument, one note at a time, it's melodic, typically doesn't play chords on purpose.
True. So no, it's fascinating because from television to film, horror film, sci-fi to comedies, with praise this was gospel mixed in. So is there, you can do it all obviously composing wise, but is there sort of a lane that you preference wise? I mean, is there something that you say, wow, I'm the horror side of things or the comedy side of things?
Well, here's what I will say. Two things. One, so for a long time, my obsession with horror films came after I saw the movie Scream in 1996. Before that, I'm sure I was pretty afraid to go down a rabbit hole of studying horror films on my own in the 80s. I grew up with Freddy Krueger, like this idea of this concept where, some of these things that get into so deep in your psyche is like, I was like, that wasn't for me. But when I saw the movie Scream, the music gripped me so much that it became, I mean, like I want to say a 10-year obsession or what, from watching that movie to being obsessed with USC, Marco Beltrami, to becoming his intern, and eventually writing additional music on Scream 4. Like this seemed like this this dream fairy tale Cinderella ending come true to be able to work with the guy that I was obsessed with. As opposed to when I first met him, I actually couldn't even speak. I was so shocked that something that I had internalized as this goal, like this person was standing in front of my face where I had no idea how to connect the dots. And then here they are. And then fast forward later that I worked with them. That was my main, it was always about the music. I didn't realize it, honestly. I saw Scream in 96 and it wasn't until 2011, after working on that I realized that whole because I went deep down the rabbit hole. I've done a lot of indie horror films that it was always about the music. It wasn't about, so much, because there's a whole culture, and I was going to Scream Fest and Horror festivals looking for directors and on the internet and rabbit holes and groups and looking for, I was like, how can I express this sound now with, and I love, the process. I can talk about Coming to America all day, because the funny thing about it is, that score actually, and I didn't know that this was going to be the case. I don't think anyone knew that it was going to be the case. But when I started working on it, I started slowly realizing that any and everything I've ever done in my entire life regarding music, I had to use every single one of those skills in that movie, from arranging to gospel to sweeping orchestral to romantic music to action adventure music, thematic music. Like I said, we had a giant orchestra, like everything. We had chamber groups, we had solo ensembles, we had vocals, we had choir. every one of those things that I've ever done. So elements of jazz mixed in there. I
Mhm.
had to because the script required those things.
Yeah.
What I will say is, I wasn't sure if I'd ever venture at all into the realm of additional music ever again. But Daniel Hart, composer of Peter Pan and Wendy,
Mhm.
asked me after Coming to America had happened if I would be a part of that process with him, just because he thought my work would help tell their story based on other
Yeah.
work that I'd done. And to answer your question, it's a long, drawn out question. And like I said, it was like a year and a half before we worked on that. He asked me that. Um,
Mhm.
that was probably one of the ones that I feel like when you talk about your lane
Mm.
and what you want to do, your aspirations, it seemed, along with Coming to America, the most
Mhm.
natural, where there was very little. Could you do more of this? I like that, but can you think of it? It was just like we just did it. You know, we just did it, and that
Sure.
was one of those things where you go, oh, okay, and there's no, I'm a little bit more like this. It was just like we
Mhm.
just did it. And with Coming to America, I don't think that we ever had an official spotting session, even.
Wow.
Some projects happen like that where you start writing a cue and then it just becomes about what because the way movies are made a lot of times there is a temp score, but
Mhm.
then it
Mhm.
becomes about, okay, this part of the story we're having trouble putting it together in the edit because we can't find the right temp. Can you compose a piece of music for this? And it
Right.
just at certain points where it became about composing pieces that help tell the story, you know,
Yes.
and that was how that movie kept going. And at a certain point, we're like halfway through scoring, realizing we didn't spot the movie, and it's just like, well, just keep doing what you're doing was the note. Just keep doing what you're doing, you know. Um, that was a major note that I had. Just keep going.
Yeah. And that
Yeah.
correct, Jermaine? That's a rare situation, I would fathom to
Super
say.
rare.
Yeah.
Super rare. Praise
Mhm.
This, which you mentioned, was,
Mhm.
I wouldn't say the opposite of that, but very different. There was one piece of music that I actually wrote because I was very interested in that movie early on. I heard about it in 2018, 2019. So I have at least one or two pieces that I wrote as a demo when
Okay.
that was in kind of a pitch stage or not even pre-production that I had written to maybe pitch to the director years later if it ever came around. That
Mhm.
actually
Mhm.
ended up in the movie.
Wow.
So there is a scenario where I was like, okay, I have a sound that I want to give for that. So it was in line with, thankfully, what the director felt. But in a
Mhm.
lot of cases, the director of that, Tina Gordon, she had a very specific vision for what she wanted the music to be. So
Mhm.
spotting,
Mhm.
we had many
Mhm.
spotting sessions.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it was tricky because it's a musical
Sh
too, and I'm writing a score,
Yeah.
and there's 60 minutes of songs in the movie, so you have to be very careful how you use score to not do the same thing that the songs are trying to accomplish the same goals the songs are accomplishing.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
so that was a challenge on that one. But like I said, it's funny. They can be all different, the different things that, you know, ways of getting through these things.
Yes, yes. No, and to thread that needle, Jermaine, because something you mentioned on our panel the other day that I really resonated with is what you're saying as, a working artist, composer, is someone shouldn't have to ask, what are you working on? We should, I'm going to
Right.
paraphrase, I'll let you
Right.
articulate
Yeah.
that. Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah. I was just saying that, so no one should ask you to do what you do for a living or what you say that you want to do. I heard this title, Praise This, and I was, stop the press. What is this movie? Praise This? I love
Mhm.
gospel. I love choir. I love score. I want to be the composer of this thing. I immediately start writing music for this thing in my mind with the idea that um, maybe it'll be useful then, as opposed to, can you send in a random reel based on something else that you've done for this thing?
Yeah.
I felt like I needed a specific um, approach in terms of going after it. I felt like,
Mhm. Mhm.
I wanted to be ready when it did come around. And I tracked with it, and through the pandemic, like it was sitting. There were times where I would every now and then just write a piece for it for a rainy day, not
Yeah.
knowing if I got the gig, if that piece would be appropriate.
Right.
But that's something I do now, and I recommend other artists do it in terms
Hmm.
of, I mean, being oneself. No one has to tell you to do it or if it's right or if it's wrong, especially if the movie doesn't exist yet, right? So
Mm.
you don't
Yeah.
know if it's wrong. You got to just do it. You say you want to do it, um, do it.
100%. Have that intention. And something you mentioned on one other chat, and it's been
Mhm.
years since I played the piano, but it resonated with me that you talked about as an exercise for composers. Is what if you walk us through the etude?
Etude?
Yeah.
Oh, what did I say?
I
Uh,
think it was something is the etude. I believe it's writing in a single voice of an instrument, and it's an exercise
oh,
composers can do.
I mean, I think about that I was even thinking about that today. The idea of, I think I always imagine millions of people want to have coffee with John Williams and ask him how he does what he does. And I think when I
Yeah.
hear his music, sometimes I think to myself, I can't tell if he wrote the melody first, thought about a feeling first, or thought about the chords first. But I think that with the use of reharmonization, and I mean, I think anyone would say, any writer even would say writing is rewriting. So I think it's possible to write an entire melody first. I
Mhm.
recommend people ask, what to do when you're starting off as a composer. I definitely try to steer people in the direction of not trying to write a full blown orchestral score, for your first film or whatever. I mean, if it comes up, it comes up, but typically that's not going to be your first opportunity.
Mhm.
But try to write a piece of music that communicates an idea, maybe a solo instrument, you know, and
Yes.
try to tell a story from beginning to end using one instrument. I mean, typically, might be piano. It's cheating. You can use multiple notes once you get into that, but
Mhm.
a flute or a cello or a chamber piece, smaller, maybe not one instrument, but maybe four players or something
Mhm.
where it's a small group, um, and they're able to really get into the inner workings of composition itself.
Yes,
That's
yes, and
part of
it's
my advice.
no, I think it's on point, and hearing that, and then to thread the needle, because I work with some independent artists who some of them they may not be classically trained, and they're just playing by ear, but
Mhm.
correct in composition. The benefit if you have that training and background, correct, I think is it with happy melodies or songs, they tend with its major chords that emote that feeling of happiness.
You would think so,
Ah,
but I
okay,
have to
let's
tell you,
sure.
I have to tell you, it's subjective. Sometimes it's landing on a major chord, or it's setting up a major key and then um, going to something that's not close to that. And when you set up your tonal center as being a thing, it's the process of getting away from it and back to it that tells the story or underlines emotion. You know, I don't think. Um, I mean, I even feel like I'm absolutely 100% still learning about this because I know how certain music makes me feel, and I
Mhm,
think that
mhm,
because of my background and
mhm,
because of my unique um, desire to have gone down this extensive harmonic rabbit hole early
mhm,
on,
mhm.
uh, certain things make me feel different than they might make someone else feel had they not studied music and kind of like played chords over and over and over that made them feel a certain way that they like. They just might
Mhm.
be an audience member. Um, I always thought growing up that yes, simple, super simple. Minor chord, sad. Major key, happy. That is not universally true. Um,
I see.
um, it just isn't.
Mhm, mhm.
Sometimes one note sustained uh, means very sad. Sometimes one note sustain means sustained or suspension or tension. One note
Mm,
can be tension.
mm,
If you think of The Dark Knight and what Hans Zimmer calls the
yeah.
Joker's theme, he says it's one note just being sustained. Right? For those filmmakers in that world and a lot of the audience, that
Mhm.
translated to tension. Just one note, or a rising note, that's bending upward. That's but that if you think about the end of the trailers, a lot of the times a rising note. I mean, it is building tension, but it just kind of anticipation. It's a different
Yeah.
emotion. Um,
Yeah, it's going to change the way now when I go back and watch certain pieces. And since you mentioned
uh-huh.
Hans Zimmer, one of my favorite films, Gladiator,
Mm,
I think the closing piece with the vocalist Lisa Gerrard, if I remember
mm.
correctly. But seeing, I think it was about 5 years ago when they performed all that live. I don't know. Were you able to catch that concert?
I didn't get to that, but I think I heard a lot about it.
Yeah, no, it was. I think he did obviously all his works, and if I'm not mistaken, I want to say he might have been at Coachella one year.
Probably knowing him, I mean, he's doing a lot of touring lately, like a lot.
Mhm.
And I'm sure that'd be a show to catch. I know Danny Elfman's been doing. You know, he did a major Coachella last year that was like mind blowing. Like it was universally mind blowing. It made headlines as for a new generation of people. Who is this
Yeah,
guy? You know what I mean? The
right.
young 20-year-olds that weren't watching. I mean, Pee Wee's Big. I saw Pee Wee's Big Adventure in the theaters, and this is something that he's doing at Coachella in 2023. That was 1985. Pee Wee's Big Adventure. I mean, it's like all of a sudden for a giant, crowd of I
Mhm.
don't even know how many 100,000, 50,000, whatever the crowd was.
Yeah, yeah,
It's iconic because of how it's presented, and it's burned in
yeah.
your memory as this thing. If no one had heard that, I'm sure. What is that? I need to, have that on my playlist. And as they grow up, it's part of their life. Pretty
Yes,
impressive stuff. I know that
100%.
Lauren Boff just did. I think he conducted at the Hollywood Bowl a video game concert either this weekend or last night. And I'm not familiar with what. I think it had to do with video games stuff. So um, it's one of the exciting things that people can you know hear live, film, TV, video
Mhm.
game music at
Mhm.
concerts these days as a regular thing.
Yeah, yeah, no, and that crossover, Jermaine, of whether it's Trent Reznor or Danny Elfman
Hmm.
from his band Oingo Boingo into being a composer, and that lane, and similar, I think like James Ehoff from the Smashing Pumpkins is composing for some television, but it's an exciting time.
You
It's
know
there's
what?
so
It's interesting. I'm such a fan of this thing. I have to say that I'm very interested to see this new Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie. Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross are scoring that.
yes,
When I saw those names, I was like, now that's interesting. An
right.
animated thing
Hmm.
for kids. I mean, not just for kids, but like an animated Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. It's an iconic.
Hmm.
It's almost like a comic book, like their interpretation of that. To me, like I want to hear that score no matter what happens.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? That's
yeah,
very different. You know, super
yeah.
outside the box. Very excited. I was funny you mentioned that. I was like, I just saw that they were doing that. I was like, wow,
Right.
I'm impressed already. Um,
That's gonna be, yeah. I mean, correct, and
yeah.
I'm sure you'll agree because as there's no substitute. Gotta see it in theaters, THX, the
Of
surrounds.
course,
Yeah, 100%.
everything. I
Yeah,
love that stuff.
yeah,
That's what
yeah.
I'm saying.
It's but speaking of
Well,
that,
that's actually, well, I was going to say, speaking of that, you're talking about, genres and either where you feel comfortable or things that you would want to do. I think animation would be somewhere that I would be happy to fall into one after the other, different animated stories.
mm,
Um, Not just be like, oh, I haven't done animation in a feature, and like I'd like to do one. Like, I mean, I'd like to do like 10 or 20, 30 animated films.
Yeah.
Because I feel like the first thing I will say is they do take a long time, and I
Mm.
tend to like to develop a lot of the things that I'm working over a period of time. I think I don't want to say I work best that way, but again, I appreciate and understand that writing is rewriting, and I'm okay with that. Um, but I've heard good things about the process of scoring feature animated films, and I feel like it's somewhere that when that happens, could be a good rabbit hole to stay in.
Yes.
Go down
No.
and stay in.
Yeah, 100%. And I can imagine, correct. Obviously, the stark difference between television and film, television's fast paced and as far as the deadline goes, whereas with
Hmm.
film, you can really it's a different time frame, obviously.
It's a different kind of what I want to say. Almost say after the it's it's a marathon.
Yeah.
You're run. It's like I feel like towards the end, things
Hmm.
can really, really ramp up at the end, where you've been developing and kind of jogging the whole time. And if you're keeping track, keeping pace, but at the end, uh, you really have to, there's like a giant, funnel process where if you're recording or delivering or sending to a mixer and, all these, there's a lot of time that has to be managed at the end where it's not like this well-oiled machine that you get into groove and then the last episode you're just done, you know.
Hmm.
A lot of things all kind of come together at the very end. In some cases, parts of the film that may or may not have, if you're working on that kind, been animated, are scenes are actually there at the end where that might change the direction of what you might have been thinking musically. Scenes might now be shorter or longer. They may be shorter or longer after you recorded, which in many cases they are. And that is the part where the rubber meets the road in terms of the film scoring marathon of it all. All these things coming together that weren't a factor before. Now they're there, Or on this song they couldn't license now is going to lead into or out of a cue that's in a different key. These are all
Yeah.
things that just multiple things that just happen towards the end of the process that you need to be ready for.
Yes. Yeah. Always. And correct, Jermaine, is I don't know how often this happens, but with television, are correct there are cases where maybe a cue they were going to license fell through, so then you might have to score something or
Yes, you might have to score an actual. I mean, you may have to do something that sounds like it, functions like it,
Mhm.
has similar instruments, but you also may have to change direction completely. You know, there is always I mean, I think every director I've worked with typically at least says with their mouth, "I'm open to hearing anything." You know what I
Mhm.
mean? So
Mhm.
it would be on the table that you could present something that maybe um, could completely change their mind if it blows them away. Of course, it'll
Mhm.
have to blow a long list of other people away as well.
Mhm.
Um, if that happens at the last minute, because everyone would be used to something else by then. But
Yeah.
um, it's not out of the question to have something, an alt. Alts are a
Right.
thing. If
Right.
there's one quote I can leave you with for the day, it's alts are a thing. That's for sure.
Yes, yes. And then in my line of business, as we call it, the dreaded temporary love. Song's been
Uh-huh.
temp, but the studio can't afford it, so they call a sync agent to put in an indie band at a fraction of the budget.
Hmm. You know all about that.
Oh yeah, a day in the life. But so as far as new projects go, Jermaine,
Mm.
I know if you want to take a couple minutes. I believe this is a horror or thriller starring Heather
Well,
Graham. Is it
yeah, there's a movie called Oracle. It doesn't have a release date right now, but it's through Universal. It's actually the movie I did right after coming to America. Believe it or not. It sounds like wow, it sounds like a long time ago. Well, it kind of was, but it was fun because with that one, I actually took after I got the gig about 3 months or so
Mhm.
while they were shooting and literally just made sounds, just sampled and recorded. And I actually hired a synth programmer to um, manipulate the sounds that I recorded and create really kind of a library of sounds just for this movie so that when I started writing, everything about it would be different.
Ah.
And like I said, I had, probably 4 batches of things that I went back and forth, just recording, sending, manipulating, getting stuff back, then tweaking it again, recording more
Mhm.
stuff from, again, saxophone sounds, multiphonics, whatever,
Yeah.
piano scrapes inside the piano, whatever, at a vocal recording session where I recorded some chanting and different things.
Mhm.
Um, and then sent all that stuff off and then had, something that I wouldn't think of
Mm.
manipulated, and then listen to the things that I responded to as does this work in this universe that I'm kind of creating.
Yeah.
That's one of the fun things about, I think, projects that take longer is that if you have the time, you can really um, try to do something different. You
Mm.
could put forth the effort. You could campaign to do something different. It's not just like you say it, like you can actually have the time, you just do it. And
Yes.
that one is one of the things I always wanted to say that I I wanted other people to say. There's no way that the composer of that last film did this one. 'Cause I wanted it to
Yeah.
sound so different, but actually be the one that did it. And then there's another project I mentioned the movie Canvas, directed by Frank Abney. He's actually working on another short project that is very personal to him,
Mhm.
that we're getting into just now as well. So that will be one of the more intimate things, but hopefully one that when people see it, they're uh, they're very taken by how emotional it is, but
Mm.
how simple and direct and beautiful it is. So that's the intention, my intention behind that. It's really
Mm.
not just
Mhm.
doing it, but really thinking about how I want to feel, how I want people to feel
Mhm.
when they receive it. Because it's easy to just do something, put it out there, do the next thing, put it out
Mm.
there.
Mm.
Sounds fine to us, and you just move through them. But I was talking to I don't know if you know Bill Ross is an orchestrator. Um, he orchestrated Coming to America actually a week ago or so. He was talking about because he's done some writing as well. He scored whole films, um, and he was talking about. I was asking him about writing, just scoring, as
Mhm.
opposed to orchestrating. Would you ever put that off and just focus on scoring? He was talking about how it's so time intensive to do something meaningful. I love that word meaningful that he said,
Mm.
um, because, like I said, writing is rewriting. To just kind of crank something out, I
Mhm.
don't think that's what I want to do. You know, I think I
Mm.
want to do things where I'm thinking about how I'm feeling or other people are feeling while I'm doing them. And then
Mhm.
when they hear them, like I've had people tell me, like I said, that short film Canvas, it's on Netflix. We didn't know it was going to end up on Netflix. Where people were just flipping through randomly and they're watching and it looks interesting. I'll check it out. And they go,
Mm.
"Oh wait, Jermaine did this. Oh wow, like I had no idea." And they go, "Oh, that was actually really good." Well, the reason it was good is because it's a 8 or 9 minute short film that we worked on for a year and a half, and we talked about feeling. The
Yeah.
whole time we were talking about feeling on the phone late at night. And this makes me
Mhm.
feel this way, and it becomes a conversation. And thankfully, we can be very thankful, I think, as artists to uh, say that we get to do things that we enjoy doing. Like
Yeah.
it wasn't a drag to be on the phone with him at night talking about how we
Right.
felt in this part of the story. It was part of the process, and we enjoyed that. I think
Mhm.
we're about to go back down that rabbit hole again. It's not going
Mm.
to be a year and a half thing, but
Uh-huh.
similarly, it's going to be one that the whole point of it is to create something that someone feels.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and that said, I was just curious, Jermaine, because I can only imagine. Are there certain times in the day
Mm.
that you're most inspired, that things really click, or just kind of depends if you're going down a rabbit hole? Because
Mm-hmm. For me, it's definitely between 5 and 10 p.m.
Mhm.
10 p.m. might be kind of late. I think the pandemic has gotten me into going to bed on time and enjoying sleep if possible. But I don't know, right around 5 o'clock, I feel like, that it's a funny time where I can end up skipping dinner and really getting into a creative, thing, and things can really start flowing around then for me.
Sure.
Also, I've done some creative output, not binge, but just like had some spells where I got a lot of really uh, significant work done super early in the morning, at like 6. But that's not when I'm staying up late. That's when I'm going to bed earlier, like 9 or 10 p.m. And
Yeah.
then first thing I'm doing is going straight to it. Those are moments
Sure.
where um, I've gotten a good amount of good stuff done super early.
Yeah.
Not during the middle of the day. Lunchtime is the worst.
Yeah, and I'm curious because obviously you have your studio there, but you're syncing it to picture? Obviously, you have you're composing to the picture on screen at any given moment.
Uh, More often than not, these days I try to actually go away from it. I mean, the picture is there, but I try to map out what I want to do and then kind of turn the picture off
Okay.
because I think I get, you know, sometimes it's possible. I don't say I do get, but I think it's possible to get distracted by the film and
Yeah.
not thinking about the idea that you're trying to express, making it an idea. Now, when you go back to the picture, I think it is the responsibility to make sure you're out of the way of dialogue, underlining this, hitting the parts of the story that you want to hit, underlining them, highlighting them. But in terms of writing a piece of music that is matched up to picture, I think that it's important to not be staring at, because I can get into just watching the movie. We're telling the story that's on the screen. I need to watch it probably, 100 times or 20 times or whatever before, I know everything about it that I need to know, or talk to the director about what's there or what needs to be there added to it. But I think I've gotten out of just kind of like watching and kind of improvising the picture as a thing. Like it's like I now want, the music that I write moving forward as much as possible to be telling a flowing story that is the exact replication of what we see on screen. And
Okay.
it's about going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back
Sure.
and forth,
Yeah.
until it's done.
Got
Who
it.
knows
No.
if that's the right approach?
No.
uh, but it's what I'm doing more often than not. I mean,
Yeah.
I go back to Coming to America a lot. There was a lot of music in that movie. There's several themes that I wrote before they shot the movie that ended up working for the movie because I was trying to create a feeling of that was described to me. For instance, I listened to the first movie and I thought about, since I know that they're going to use classical elements or orchestral elements, there's going to be a sense of being regal in the movie, royalty. Um, the opening scenes of the original Coming to America, when there's like a string orchestra in the balcony or there's instruments playing, brass. What's the feeling of that? And then I went to the piano and kind of sketched out some things that I knew that there was going to be a very big father-son thematic element to this new movie. And with that all that information combined, like I said, they hadn't shot, so it's like,
Wow.
it's like, I have to create a world because in
Right.
part 2 we're gonna exist. Most of the movie takes place in Zamunda, a place that we only see parts of in the first movie. So, yeah, the first piece we recorded was something that I sat down and just kind of wrote as this is a father and son moment, in the movie. It's funny because the cue was written for a different moment in the film, but it was still a part of the fabric that I was creating, and it had a very free flowing melodic thing. Um, it's I don't know if it's called Babar, Babar, or father and son moment in the film. It's the film where Prince Akeem and his son are walking in the field, and the elephant kind of walks through them. That moment was the first cue that we recorded at the session, and it was also one of the first cues that I wrote. And it's funny when it was suggested to record that first, I didn't think about this is one of the first cues I wrote. Yes, that makes sense. But it's just a cue that everyone plays on. It's not too over the top, and it very much has the language of the entire film in that one cue. And so when you're thinking about doing these things, that's the kind of intention that I'm talking about when it's like being deliberate in the story I'm trying to tell, because then I can use that theme in different places, later. Now that I've got it,
right.
And it's available to use. We've decided this is working. We do all kinds of things with that theme later.
No, that's great, Jermaine. And also correct, I think, to prepare you for that moment, sometimes before you go into a session, you'll listen to pieces of music that might inspire you to get into that feeling or moment.
Definitely. I mean, that's why I watched, the first thing I did was buy the original Coming to America, the digital version, so I could have it on my phone, have it on the iPad, have it on a laptop, have it, at home, anywhere I could just go back to it and just feel where are we coming from? Because, if it's 1988, 89 in the movie, like, you don't want it to sound like that now, and it wouldn't, because that's not what we're recording. We're recording it differently than they recorded. However, you want to know where you're coming from, in terms of language. I mean, that was a sequel, so that's an example I use for that. But I definitely like to. I know that some people have said that they can't have any outside influences whatsoever, but I will say I do try to take all outside influences that have nothing to do with what I'm doing away from me, for sure, because I don't want to be getting down super rabbit hole. I definitely listened to a lot of Afro trap in the car when I was scoring Coming to America, so that those influences would influence the orchestral and the chamber and the comedic thing. Like, I wanted to just have these grooves and the tendencies of the music to just be in my DNA as I was doing it. So that was the main thing I was listening to in the car. During that process, it wasn't a lot of classical music. It's just the things that I would think that they would be playing on the radio in 2023 in West Africa. Popular, that kind of thing, contemporary music in Africa. Not, super traditional African instruments. I mean, you're going to have some of that. But,
Sure. Yeah, and I think I saw a clip, Jermaine, which was very cool. I think for that Coming to America, there was a instrumentalist. He was playing a piece.
Pedro Eustache, maybe. This giant contrabass flute thing that you sing and blow into at the same time. I think that was better than what you saw. He's great. I worked with him a couple times, but he suggested this instrument. Again, during COVID, we couldn't get together, so over the phone he was playing. We didn't even do FaceTime. He just sound. Like, he was like, "What do you think about this, sister? What do you think about that?" Which I thought was honestly a better way. I probably would have picked the instrument that looked the coolest. But when he played that, like, it just had such a humanistic quality that it added to the fun and the energy of the things. It just really brought a lot of stuff to life,
Yeah, no, it's that. It was so cool to see that piece and thread the needle. And then as we go look towards my final question, I was just going to ask you: have you ever worked on any pieces in film with the theremin?
Actually, there's one piece that I can think of. It's not a live theremin, but I did use it in an episode
Ah,
of a TV show called uh, Stretch Armstrong and the Flex Fighters, which is on Netflix. And
okay.
it's a episode. I'd have to look it up and send it to you, the name of
Sure.
it, but it's where this plant is coming to life. Um,
Okay.
and it's just growing and these different limbs start coming out. And I was like, it just sounded like the perfect instrument to use. And it's like kind of a, Frankenstein ha 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 moment with the
Yeah.
electricity. It's kind of crazy. A little nod to old Hollywood. But yeah,
Mhm.
I would love to use it more and or an actual live one and see
Yeah.
how the sound of that could be manipulated because it can be a very organic sound. But
Yes.
I know that there are other things that could probably be done with it that
Mhm, mhm.
haven't completely been tapped yet. Having it
100%.
be the source, you know.
Yeah. I think it was probably in the 90s, but the British band trip hop band Portishead, I think they used a lot of the theremin in that
Mm,
record. And then Beth
okay.
Gibbons, her vocals just really complemented that eerie sound of the theremin. But
Uh,
yeah.
yeah, I'd love to even have one just for the
Mm.
kids to experiment on. I mean, not like this is a toy, but my son comes in here, he starts turning things on and like trying things, and he loves sound. By the way,
Mm. Mhm,
um,
mhm.
loves sound.
Yeah, my when I used to DJ, but vintage synthesizers, the Roland Juno, that's my those are the toys that I try and try and
Mm-hmm.
not collect too many because then it's
Yeah, it's dangerous. As soon as you start, then it doesn't want to stop.
yes, yes. But you know, a closing question we like to ask our guests when they're join us in the studio. What's on play on repeat right now in your car on your Spotify playlist?
You know what's funny? You asked me that because yesterday I struggled with whether or not to download this,
uh
and it is on repeat right now. Literal repeat. The new Helena's theme from Indiana Jones. New thing. Disney released it early, um, but I mean, let's see, it's got a violin solo here by Sophie uh, and Sophie Mutler, and I struggle with whether or not to download it because I tend to, specifically with John Williams, want to hear his scores
Mm.
with the film the first time I hear them. And there's a clip that, like I said, Disney released, showing him conducting the orchestra with her playing. And I went to iTunes and was like, I just want to pre-order the album. I don't want to hear it again. I don't want to hear it. But all you could find was just this. And it
Ah.
has been on repeat since yesterday. So to answer your question, uh, literal repeat. Um, there's so much history, so much. I mean, the word nostalgia. The music is saturated with nostalgia,
Mm.
um, and it's hard to describe and put into words, other than to say it sounds beautiful, it sounds perfect, it sounds inevitable. Um, every note, every phrase, and
Mm.
super excited to see the movie, but like again, it's easy to go down a John Williams rabbit hole. This was talked about as being one of his last, if not his last score,
Mm.
in
Mhm.
terms of retiring. And to
Yeah.
just listen to this music and think about what if it is or was, or um, it's, I'm anyone listening to this podcast, listen to that music and tell me, um, does this not describe the definition of nostalgia to you?
Mhm. Mm.
I think and I will say it probably more and more as I get older, that, it goes without saying how important of a figure in music and film scoring, the idea that I could have this as a career. You could interview people that have it as a career, writing music to picture. John Williams is what we consider a through line of the medium itself. from old Hollywood to 2023, where all kinds of things are used for film scoring. This guy is the line from the guys that, and I mean, he worked with the old Hollywood guys. He came up in the system, and for him to still be composing music, whether it's pencil and paper or not, the fact that he's doing these scores, and it is pencil and paper, at the age of 91 years old, an actual Indiana Jones movie, and not using, it's him, writing it all. There's something to be said about process. I can go on and on and on. Excited for, I think we all know, you probably know this, that Steven Spielberg is directing a documentary on John Williams' life. I'm excited to know that is happening. It's who better to do it and to make it feel like a giant warm hug. But like he said many times, everyone on this planet is benefiting from John Williams having lived and or scored anything.
Yes.
So I'd like to leave this podcast with a huge shout out to John Williams. That's where I'm at right now.
I second that notion. No, I'm gonna, after we conclude this, I'm gonna have to check. So the film is coming out, should be coming out soon, I would imagine.
Friday.
Oh, that's right.
Thursday, Friday, yeah. 30th, 29th, 30th.
Perfect timing to check it out. No, thank you for that. That's it's going to be on, and that's what's great, like you said, is you can hop in the car. That score will take you somewhere from the present moment that we are here, whether it's good or bad, and just for that moment of escape.
Yes.
So
very much so.
Yeah, but no, thank you, Jermaine. The time flies by. I mean, that's why I was really happy, because there's only so much in a 60-minute panel with 6 other panelists.
The panels are great because it's like I want to hear what they're saying too. And they had a lot of great points, but also you find that there's a commonality. Like certain things I don't have to say because everyone's saying similar things, but it's just a different angle of the same thing,
Yes. Yes.
And that was the cool thing about it, whether it's poetry, spoken word, beats, like we're all talking about the same thing, storytelling.
Yeah, 100%. But thank you, Jermaine, for taking the time out. Really appreciate you and all of your amazing work. And
thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And with that, everybody, smash that like button, subscribe, and we'll catch you next time on Sync Riffs. And thank you so much again, Jermaine Stegall, the amazing film composer here in Los Angeles. Catch everybody on the other side. Namaste.
Thank you.
Go.